Well, we can go now to Dr. Peter Caddick-Adams, war professor and NATO historian, who can talk to us a little bit more about this. Thank you so much. We're pleased to have got you back. Let me start by asking you, if I may, were you surprised to see in these leaked documents and the reporting of them how low the bar is for Russia either using a tactical nuclear weapon, also known as a battlefield nuclear weapon, or even intercontinental ballistic missiles with a nuclear warhead? Was this a surprise to you?
No, not in the slightest, because this goes back straight to the era of the Cold War, when the Soviets had exactly those kind of rules of engagements. And to be honest, so did we. And that was known on both sides. That hasn't really altered between the removal of the previous Soviet era and the modern Russian era taken over by Putin. And those in the know would have had no surprise to discover that those rules of engagement really haven't altered in any way at all. So that's what we would have always been dealing with, knowing that those were the sort of Russian thresholds. So no, amongst the military community and the foreign affairs communities of NATO, well, that was always the understanding that the thresholds were round about there, which is why diplomacy and containment has always been the main aim of the West with Russia, especially under Putin.
Peter, I mean, as you say, it's no surprise to the military community. It certainly doesn't help me sleep easy in my bed at night. How set are those rules? Because they also need sort of, if you breach the 20% of nuclear tactical subs, Russian nuclear tactical subs, I mean, is it a sort of a hard and fast rule, or is there still room for diplomacy, like, for example, we saw in the Cuban Missile Crisis, most famously of all, for de-escalation?
Okay, well, I mean, you know, my message is one of calm and reassurance. For one thing, Putin hasn't threatened nuclear war. He's implied it. We are actually where we were 2 years ago when Russia invaded. And Putin's words were, I would unleash weapons and damage on the rest of the world or the West, the like of which you have not seen before. And about a year later, he said, but I never said nuclear weapons. I just said weapons of extreme violence. So he admitted that he was playing with words. And he's doing the same again, because if you look at the words he used, he hasn't said nuclear forces. He's just said weapons, vicious weapons that the West wouldn't like. But he hasn't used those magic words. And every now and again, he comes up with this saber-rattling bluff. But I have to say, you know, if you use nuclear weapons, you need to trial them and test them. You need to deploy them. You need your troops to have gas masks and anti-nuclear suits, NBC suits. And none of the troops are in Ukraine or anywhere else have been watched by satellite deploying with this kit. None of the vehicles that we associate with nuclear weapons have made any deployments at all. No Russian troops have been captured wearing gas masks. So this underlines the fact that this is another Russian bluff.
Peter,
and with regard to the Cuban Missile Crisis,
Peter, if I can,
go on.
I just wonder whether you think President Putin's been emboldened by the comments by former President Trump, from someone quite likely to win the presidential election in the United States, that he wouldn't come to the aid of NATO allies who hadn't spent 2% of GDP on defence. Will Putin have been emboldened by, in my view, those deeply irresponsible comments by Trump undermining the NATO alliance?
I agree with you that they're deeply irresponsible, and that's exactly what's emboldened him. Don't forget that when he invaded Ukraine, he was emboldened by the Allied, by the coalition catastrophic evacuation from Afghanistan. And, you know, that sent a message to him that if we couldn't get our act together and we'd lost the political will to fight in other countries, we probably weren't going to be able to support Ukraine, either because we were disorganized or we didn't have the political will. That was why one of the main reasons, I think, why he went into Ukraine 2 years ago. And now we've got the same again, which is mixed messages coming from the West. The Trump view is different from Macron's, which is different from Jens Stoltenberg, head of NATO. And all of a sudden, the classic mode of disinformation and propaganda is to try and separate your opponents from their coalition.
Peter, divide and conquer, I think you will know as a
Exactly,
historian, the oldest war tactic there is. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really grateful to hear from you today on TalkTV.